So in order for you to follow this same structure, I'm going to be giving you guys some tips that you can use to sort of pick up on movement a little bit faster, things that you need to know and need to do in order to be able to play the game a little bit easier. Okay. So with that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about the tips that we're going to be covering. There's going to be 3 things that I'm going to be talking about. The first one is going to be counterstraffing. We're going to be talking a little bit about what counterstraffing is. Is it necessary? What is it about it exactly that really makes people tick? The second thing is navigation, how you move around the map, specifically how you move around while preparing or getting ready for a fight. And last but not least, fighting itself and what you need to do in order to be able to play. Let's get started. Okay, so the first thing that you need to know is counterstrafing. Originally, it comes from CS. Historically, it's one of those things that we know from CS, and it dates back to CS. And the way that it works is simply like this. You're moving with one key, and what happens is once you let go of that key, you still have momentum, and it carries over. And in order for you to be completely accurate, you need to be standing still. In order for you to stop moving, you need to press the opposite key just for a little bit, just pressing it once. You don't have to hold it or anything. And this causes a counter strafe. It moves you in the counter direction of where you were going. This stops your movement temporarily, allowing you to take an accurate shot. In CS, this was necessary. In a game like this one, we're going to be able to see that you are able to do really cool things with counterstrafing, where you're able to catch opponents off guard and still being able to get back into cover just simply by using this counterstrafe mechanic. However, like I just mentioned, that's something that dates back to CS. What about Valorant? Is it necessary? Now, seeing from this video right here, this is actually from a VOD that Tense did from one of his streams. And basically what he did is simply played a little bit without counterstrafing. He just moved around and let go of the key. So what did we find out? Simply put, it's a lot more accessible. The game is a lot more accessible. Counterstrafing is not as required. It is not as necessary, but it allows you to understand a couple things. Counterstrafing is really good at being able to stop in moments where you just need to have a good reaction, maybe a reaction, maybe you need to kind of stop all of a sudden and catch the opponent off guard. It's still something that you can use when you want to catch opponents off guard or you get caught off guard. But in terms of how it comes to just stopping still, you can still let go and still be very proficient in your fights. The target of how you deal with enemies becomes less about you counterstrafing and making sure that you're always having the right counterstrafe and more about anticipating these fights because you need to be ready to let go of that key at any moment. So what is the tip when it comes to counterstrafing? Instead of learning about what the perfect counterstrafe is, in order for you to improve in the current state that you are in, okay, again, this is for beginners. In the current state that you are in, you're going to get better simply by improving on your fight anticipation. And so in order for you to anticipate fights, there's a lot of things that you can do, but fight anticipation is simply like this. You are expecting a fight. So what you do is you position yourself in a way that you are ready to take that fight at any time. Good example is right here. So I'm playing this match over here in Abyss. I'm dealing with A-site, and I know that there's 3 positions that the enemy could be in. Right here on the left, and you can see that I clear it immediately. 1 in the middle, which again, I also clear, dealing with the Reyna a little bit to my right. And then right here on the right. Again, as you can see, I am clearing all of these angles, allowing me to maintain this anticipation between the targets. Okay, so this is where you can use counterstrafing or at least the letting go key to be able to prepare a little bit better when it comes to that movement. Again, counterstrafing can still be necessary, but you can still take these methods to get a little bit better in fighting opponents. So ways that you can get better at dealing with this anticipation is you can maybe die and then see where that opponent was, and then you can use that at the back of your mind and be like, okay, this is where players are going to hold. Another one is to observe your teammates. Where are they holding? Where are they playing? It's going to give you an idea where people like to play in your elo. Another one that you can do is watch pros and maybe streamers. There's some things that just stay overall very consistent across all elos. Okay. Other things to look out for that you can do is just look at natural cover. So for example, right here, that's an area that we would call natural cover. They can hide behind there or maybe behind those little boxes. Again, that's still natural cover and they can use that to basically hide from the opponent. Also look at corners, right? So for example, right here, this could be a corner. Right here, that could be a corner. Those are things that you can do to get ready for a fight and anticipate a fight. So this is where counterstrafing comes in. This is how you can use it, or the letting go key, which is technically counterstrafing. You can use that to your advantage. Let's move on to tip number 2. In order for you to know how to deal with opponents, you also need to learn how to move around the map. And this is where navigation comes in. When you are playing the game, I really expect players, once they get really good at the game, to avoid using their W and S keys the majority of the time. There's a lot when it comes to the W and S keys in the game. So for example, when you're moving diagonally, you're still providing a W or S portion to the movement, making it a lot harder for you to stop, right? It's very common nowadays that, if you need to be standing still to shoot. So when it comes to W and S, it's really hard to basically make up for that. Counter strafing is a lot more difficult to do with W and S. If you get caught off guard while you're pressing W or S, you're going to get shot and you're not going to be able to fight that back unless they whiff. Right? There's plenty of scenarios where W and S is still required. And the big one is basically scaling or repositioning, but you have to be aware that most of the time when you're preparing for a fight, you need to get good at just using A and D when you're trying to take those fights. And this is a good example right here. Notice how I'm barely using S or W, or even at all, and I'm still able to clear this entire area. This entire mid by sunset was just cleared by me pressing 2 keys, right? I'm still moving my mouse, sure, that's fine. Crosshair placement, of course, very important, but notice I'm not using W or S, and I'm still taking these angles pretty proficiently without the need of using W or S, okay? So this provides the tip, right? When you are playing, you need to learn to move with A and D, okay? When you're using W and S, you should be using it to reposition. Okay. Other things that you can do with it is to maybe scale. You want to push out a little bit, or maybe you're just pushing out aggressively. Maybe you're pushing out of Haven, right? You're pushing into side. You're pushing as an attacker. That's another place to use it. Maybe you're doing it over here where you're trying to avoid crashing into a wall, or maybe you want to get into a good angle to be able to swing. But most importantly, when you're playing in a fight, I expect you to be using A and D most of the time. W and S should be used sparingly, and once you get used to that, you're going to get better with your movement, okay? All of these tie together into one final movement, okay? One final movement tip that we all kind of need to know. It's become a lot more mainstream to know, okay? But this is the big thing that I wish people knew a lot more, especially when they get started, and that's dead zoning. In a game like Valorant, the game is very, very quick in terms of how fast you're going to die or how quickly opponents just tend to kill you. So it's very hard for you to kind of get used to this mechanic because you're going to be dying really quickly. But dead zoning, the idea of it is simply this. Using what we know between 1 and 2, we're able to know that, first of all, we're going to find opponents, but counter strafing is very important to stop our movement. And secondly, we're going to be using A and D when it comes to these fights. Putting those two together allows us to use something called dead zoning, which is basically the concept of moving left and right, side to side, while still using your A and D keys, right? And in between the motions of moving left to right, that in between right there is what allows you to stay relatively accurate. It's like counter strafing while staying in motion. And that's what dead zoning is. Dead zoning is about not stopping any of your movements and staying in motion because you're trying to avoid getting shot. In this example right here, notice how I don't really have a gun that's useful for it, but notice how I'm able to still use dead zoning to some degree, right? It's still dead zoning. I'm still moving around, moving in and out of cover while avoiding getting shot and still getting my shots out. This is what's able to get me 3 kills right here. And then my teammate's able to kind of finish them off as we play basically with a lack of economy because we all just pushed out, right? Sometimes it's easier to just prioritize being a harder target than it is to be fully accurate. It's nice to just stand still, but notice how some of my teammates just died to the opponent because they stood still trying to get the right shot. Okay, it's really important for you guys to develop this skill. It's a really important skill for you guys to develop overall because, again, you're going to be swinging to some opponents and there might be 3 holding that angle. It's very important for that, and it's going to help you deal with multiple opponents as well. So just to summarize, 3 tips. Number 1, okay, learn to fight by anticipating locations and being able to use that to either prepare your counter strafe or preparing to let go of the key. This allows you to have better peaks. Okay. Number 2 is to navigate a little bit better by using the A and D keys. Use W and S only in situations that only require to reposition or maybe move forward, right? Maybe you don't want to crash into a wall while you're using A and D, and that's fine. You can use it there, but use it sparingly. And last but not least, use dead zoning to your advantage. It's going to be a really crucial step in getting better in multiple fights or dealing with multiple opponents. Okay. With that out of the way, we're going to conclude the class aspect of this. We're going to start the question period.